Hello, everybody. My name's Belinda Chapman. I'm the host of Compassionate Women's Health Community, and our interviewee today is Kelli Zakharoff. Welcome, Kelli.
You?
And I will introduce Kelli really quickly, but the context for today is Kelli is a midwife, and we're acknowledging Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month in October. So Kelli Zakharoff is a midwife whose career has spanned 20 years. After qualifying as one of the first Bachelor of Midwifery students in Australia, she has worked in many aspects of midwifery, from birth centres, public and private hospitals, as the Queensland SIDS and Kids Education Officer, then working alongside one of Brisbane's finest private obstetricians as a private midwife, to creating her own midwifery and multidisciplinary practice in the heart of Brisbane. Kelli then went on to work at the University of Canberra, where she was a practice support midwife to the Bachelor of Midwifery students. From Canberra back to her roots in Melbourne to the Mercy Hospital with the MGP team, where she now works and is currently working on the water birth implementation project. Kelli has experienced grief and loss in her own practice as a midwife and has supported many women during pregnancy loss across her career. She has a passion for midwifery that goes above and beyond the normal, and her strengths lie in giving women the power to birth, grieve, and achieve their wishes to meet their babies on their terms. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelli, for this really special interview to acknowledge where women are at who have experienced loss and to support those around them. As we were just chatting before, the theme for the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month this month is #AtLeast. And we unpacked that because we want to share that when you start a sentence, once you've heard someone's gone through loss, with "at least it was early in pregnancy," "at least you have other children," that really invalidates that person's feelings. Have you got any thoughts on that yourself, Kelli?
I do, Belinda. Thanks so much for having me. And yes, I totally agree with some of those terms that you've literally just mentioned, that at least must be quite hurtful for quite a few women, and particularly women who, more so I believe, in the situation of miscarriages, and particularly women who have lost multiple pregnancies.
Yeah.
Or are finding it very difficult to conceive. So infertility, I think, also, the "at least" phrase really must be really deep down hurt for a lot of women, I think, because again, I believe, and as we were just chatting, I feel that might just kind of totally throw away the fact that all the work that they've done and everything they've attempted to do and all those babies that could have been here with them, as you say, at least they've got a career, or at least they've got their health and or other children. I totally agree with you. I'm not sure that "at least" is the best terminology that we could use.
So what have you found to be some really supportive and phrases that acknowledge where that person is at?
I think, and I guess in my career, I've learnt lots. And of course, when we're first starting out, it's really tough, and it's very confronting. In midwifery degrees, in nursing degrees, we don't get taught what to say. We get taught what to do and how to manage situations, but we don't necessarily get taught what to say and the words to use. We are probably implementing more of these things into these degrees these days, but I can definitely say in my own experience, I definitely wasn't taught what to say to women when they lost a baby, or, as I said, like had multiple miscarriages. To be honest, Belinda, I'm not actually sure if there are the right words to say.
Yeah.
Ever get that out of a textbook.
Yeah.
I find in my own experience, on both sides of the playing field, that when you acknowledge it
Yeah.
the fact that you acknowledge that somebody has lost something.
Yeah.
And that totally goes for death in all aspects, losing a parent, losing a brother, losing a grandmother, losing a grandfather, losing a great uncle that they may or may not have known very well. I think it's just the actual acknowledgement that that person was special to them or known to them. And same with a miscarriage. That woman may have only carried that baby for 6 to 7 weeks, but she still felt that that baby belonged to her and was going to be the baby that she was going to hold in her arms.
Yeah.
So I honestly couldn't give you the right or the wrong things to say, but I think that it's the actual pure acknowledgement, and how somebody does that. Again, I think that's such an individual thing for some to know or to learn. And unfortunately, my role as a midwife, or in being a midwife, or being in the medical profession, is, again, I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to say that. I mean, sorry, I should say there are plenty of wrong ways to say that, but there's a right way to say it, and I wish there was. Students now at this level where I am now, I do absolutely want them to be a part of it, to be present when we are supporting a woman to get through a miscarriage, a stillbirth, fetal death in utero. I think students, when they actually see the real side of it, not the textbook side, the hurt, the fear, the tears, and to accept that and to be part of that, and I think when you're part of that journey with a woman, as it is when you're part of a journey with a baby that is alive and is going to be born, that emotional aspect of our job is so important. To show your emotions is really, really important in our role. That's something that I guess sometimes I sometimes struggle with that. Maybe I'm a little bit too emotional. I do realize, how in depth I get with a lot of my women and a lot of my customers. So I do find that can be really hard to pull that away, to find the right boundaries. That is tricky sometimes to do that, but it's we learn out of a textbook.
Yes. Well, this might be the perfect time then for you to share exactly what is the modality of midwifery. And we chatted before, it is quite broad. So how do people access it, and what does it mean for their birth when they are accessing a midwife or their pregnancy?
I guess it just look, that again, you touched on it, midwifery is huge, and I guess every person who every woman, every family, every couple who makes a decision to have a baby, access healthcare. So Australia has surprisingly quite a wide variety of modalities of obstetric maternal care, and we are making that wider and wider as the years go by. And it used to be fairly limited, and a private nutrition was something that you all had to have because you had private health insurance. These days, our maternity services, particularly public hospitals, have recognised the need and utilizing actual midwives and what an actual midwife does. And I guess for the very short time, I could talk forever on this subject, of course, but I guess what a midwife does in the general terms is she supports a woman to birth. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people sort of say, well, why don't I need a doctor? No, many aspects of midwifery is about supporting a woman, and it's about achieving the goals that a woman wants. What is it that she wants out of her birth? I don't think a lot of people actually understand what they want out of their birth, but in my career and my experience of being a private practicing midwife, a home birthing midwife, and now working in an environment in a hospital where I work in an MGP, which is a maternity group practice. So we are ultimately a group of midwives who support women through all the way through their pregnancies, their labor and their birth. So that means that I and my team are on call for those women. And so they call us at 3 a.m. We make decisions to go into the hospital with them, and we support them through their labour and their birth. And then we also support them through their postnatal care. So we, in the Mercy Hospital, provide 2 weeks worth of postnatal care in their homes directly with them as a couple and their family and their extended family in some cases, and their children. And we become quite intimate with their families as well, as does, a home birth midwife. When somebody chooses to get a private practicing midwife, 9 times out of 10, a person who's choosing private practice midwifery, they're looking for support to birth their babies at home. They can also do that now with midwives who are credentialed in hospitals. There are quite a number of hospitals all over Australia that does that as well. So I guess the strength of a midwife is exactly that. And the term midwife means with woman. So it's to be with the woman and support her in her choices, in her journey. I always call it a journey with women. This is a journey, and it's a journey from that minute that pregnancy test becomes positive to that time when she's walking into her space to birth. So be that at home, or be that in a hospital, or be that, under a situation like a cesarean section, a choice of having a cesarean section, which many women can do and choose these days. So I guess modality of midwifery is really, really broad, really broad.
Yeah.
And, from 1 minute in my day, I could be talking to somebody about having a 20-week morphology scan, to then running out the door to supporting her walking into that hospital and being in labour and technically being present when her baby's born, to then weighing her baby at home. So it's really vast. I mean, a lot of people sort of ask me what you do, and when I tell them I'm a midwife, a lot of people kind of get a bit gushy and say how amazing it is. And I think sometimes I love that I'm a midwife, but I also sometimes think I forget that people see us very differently and put us very high on a pedestal. My work is hard. It's hard work,
Yeah.
It's not an easy job to do, and add into the emotional aspect of being a midwife is intense, really intense. But I love it, and I wouldn't have been here for 20 odd years if I didn't.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, one thing we didn't share was that Kelli was my private midwife when I had my son just under 6 years ago. So I had a home birth with Kelli, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It was really, really amazing. So,
Belinda.
Sorry.
I remember that day you walked in my door.
Kelli's midwifery practice was across the road from my house 6 months before I fell pregnant and 6 months afterwards. So she was just there for me for those 2 years.
It's right time.
Okay, so how did you get into midwifery? Like, what led you into it?
Well, my mother tells me that my Barbie dolls were pregnant. So I guess midwifery was always something that was ingrained in me.
Yeah.
It was just something that I wanted to do. I had my boy. I have 2 boys. My children are grown adults now, and I had my children quite young. And I always just had this thing in me. I was always attracted to babies. I was a nanny when I was quite young. I traveled around the world and did some nannying work. And I always tend to end up with the newborns, or with the mother who was pregnant that then had another baby, and I looked after the baby. So I guess it was just always in me that I wanted to had something to do with pregnancy or births or babies. So ironically, we were living in Melbourne. We had moved from Canberra to Melbourne. My son was quite young, and I was walking him through the Melbourne Exhibition Gardens one day, and I saw a careers expo was happening, and I was 23 at the time, and I'd never been to university. I actually had never finished year 12. I made a decision to leave school quite early and take off and work in my family business. And I was wandering the streets of Melbourne, and I saw this careers day, and I walked in and I saw this stand that had the Bachelor of Midwifery on the banner. And I walked up to the woman and I said, what does this all mean? What would I need to do? And she said, well, the fact that you've got a baby in that pram would be something that would qualify you to actually become a midwife. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a little scary, but yeah, sure. So I filled out the paperwork, and lo and behold, weeks later, I was accepted into the first ever Bachelor of Midwifery. So what that meant was that you didn't have to be a nurse. You didn't have to have any nursing qualification. So Australia had taken on the European and the New Zealand form of training midwives, which was just to be midwives and not necessarily nursing. So didn't have nursing degrees, had no nursing experience. So of course, I had none of that, but I was so excited, and I made a decision to actually to go ahead with it. So for almost 4 years down the track, they had a little bit of an issue with our accreditation in the end, just a few things. It had teething problems, of course. So we had to do an extra sort of 6 to 8 months of training. So we did that. And there I was on my way. And once I qualified, we actually made a decision to move our family to Queensland. So we upped out of Melbourne, and I walked into, and again, young and silly and dumb, and had really no concept of how I was going to get a midwifery job. But I walked into a hospital, a private hospital in Nambour, Selangor. So we moved to the Sunshine Coast. We'd moved to Mooloolaba. I walked into the hospital and I said to the receptionist, I'm a newly qualified midwife and I need a job. And she said, hang on, I'll go and get the nursing unit manager. So the nursing unit manager walked out and said, yep, sure, we can take you on. Again, didn't apply for a job, just happened to walk in the door at the right time. They hired me the next day. I really don't know how all this happened, but I got hired day, and I started at this incredible hospital that I was working with a group of most amazing midwives, and likes of people like Vicky Chan and Mary Young, and these are all very, very well-known midwives on the Sunshine Coast who were home birth midwives, but they were still working in the hospitals. So they taught me, I have to say, they've taught me everything I know. I learned how to do water birth at that hospital. That hospital was a private obstetric hospital that doctors sat in the corner and watched the midwives do the births and work with women. We ran our own antenatal classes. It was very progressive for the time. So this is in the thousands. So this is kind of where I started, and from then I kind of, I just kept going and I kept growing, and as in, you read out my bio, I worked for Brad Armstrong, who was a very, very well-known obstetrician in Brisbane at the time, and I'd worked with him once we left the Sunshine Coast. I moved into Brisbane and I worked in the birth centre there. I met Brad Armstrong. He asked me what I was doing there and could I come and work for him. And I did, and I was his private practicing midwife. And then from there, he encouraged me to get Medicare eligibility. So this was the time where midwives were starting to get recognised. So it was around 2010. So I'd been in midwife 10 years by that stage. And I had real passion about doing things my way. I loved working for Dr. Armstrong, but I just couldn't get ahead. So he encouraged me, and he got me through the Medicare eligibility, and I did the pharmacological course as well. And I started my own practice out of my house, out of the bottom room of my house. My children were running around mad when I was starting out talking to women and getting women in. And then, of course, my practice grew into what it was, across the road from you, to Mama. So that sort of expanded, and that was a multidisciplinary service. So as you know, Belinda, we kind of had an acupuncturist who was a fertility expert. I had a osteopath. I had a chiropractor. I had a pediatrician there for a little while. I ended up with a nutritionalist. I had a beauty therapist there. We had an incredible service there, and it was just it was my ideal. I had dreamed of this practice for a long time and worked really hard to get it up and running. And then obviously the need was so high that we did another one in the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
And then it changed. So, that's, on to, other bigger and better things.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Kelli. And I'm interested in you saying that you were, an education officer for SIDS and kids, and that's very relevant to our focus on this pregnancy and infant loss awareness. So what was your involvement in that, and what can you share from that would be relevant for listeners in this topic today?
So I took the role at the Brisbane SIDS and Kids. It was based in Mount Gravatt at the time. And I was employed as the education, because I was a midwife. And this was my in-between. We'd moved from Sunshine Coast to Brisbane. I was working at the birth centre. I was kind of working in between, and I kind of wasn't sure where I really wanted to be. So I took this role as an educator, and I worked inside their service to support women, families and extended families as well. So we're talking grandparents, we're talking aunts, uncles, anyone who may have lost a child. So that meant a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a child who had died, passed away of unknown causes. So again, something like SIDS, undiagnosed. We touched at the time on young children who had died of cancer, things like that as well. But we were mainly focused on undiagnosed reasons for death. So that kind of allowed me to work in amongst hospitals as well. And again, my access as a midwife led me into, at that time, I'd kind of known a lot of people in hospitals. I'm sorry, I'm just putting my battery on because it's telling me that it's running out. I access into quite a number of hospitals, and I then went and worked in the hospitals with a number of the midwifery kind of crew that were around at the time. So they were midwives in birthing suites, they were midwives in the antenatal areas, they were midwives who worked with home care as well, so domiciliary care. So my job was to go in, educate the midwives about talking to people who were losing babies or had lost babies. So, and again, a lot of that was around education on safe sleeping. Our main focus was really on the safe sleeping, but we then adjusted a lot of the education around how to talk to people who had actually lost babies. SIDS and Kids had counsellors available, and you could access those counsellors, but the counsellors weren't extended or funded, because obviously it was, there was lots of funding for SIDS and Kids at the time, but those counsellors weren't funded to support people who had been a part of a death. They weren't supported to actually, they weren't funded to support people like midwives. So we attempted to put together a tenure, a funding package to get that for healthcare providers. We were successful for a short period of time, but the funding obviously couldn't, continue down the path of all the time providing the counselling services. So then, of course, the hospitals then made decisions to kind of put that into their own practices and support services. So it kind of got taken away from the SIDS and Kids operation. But I guess in my role, going back to that, and the question you asked me was that we did a lot of work around teaching midwives how to teach parents how to safely sleep their babies. So the sleeping on the backs, obviously, not surrounding the cots, and actually doing a lot of the promotional material I worked on. I worked a lot on the support services around with parents who would then take up things like first aid courses as well. And of course, when you've lost a baby, and particularly a baby to SIDS, which is devastating, because there's no known cause really. And that's, I guess, there's so much guilt that goes with that, for people, that did they do something wrong? Did they provide the wrong environment for their baby to sleep in? Why? Lots of questions why, and there's never any answers. It's so unfortunate there's never an answer for those people. And they live with this for many, many years. So it was really interesting working in that environment. And of course, I'd had no experience of that. And I guess my only experience was, I was a midwife. So the assumption was that, I was able to teach people those things. So I learnt a lot, and did a lot of research, and worked very, very closely with the group who were currently working on the research. So we did a lot of research with the Children's Hospital about SIDS and unknown deaths. So again, another massive learning curve in my career, and an incredible thing. And I'm actually really glad that I did that. And I was able to work in that and bring that forward, and obviously then, teach and continue to teach once I sort of moved out of that environment in SIDS and kids as well.
Yeah, I think that leads really well to the question then around, how does midwifery support women who are experiencing miscarriage, death in utero, and that stillbirth?
I've literally just lost the volume there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Yours has just gone a bit blank. I'm not sure why.
I'll just pause. So just Kelly's back. So we're just checking in, how does midwifery support women who are experiencing miscarriage, death in utero, and stillbirth? What's the role of the midwife in that?
Look, I guess that is, it's a tough question to answer, to be honest. I think the role of a midwife in that environment is absolutely potential. She has potential. I want to use that word. She has potential to do an incredible thing, and the midwife, has the ability to make or break. It can be very raw obviously it's very raw for the family, it's very raw for the woman, it's very raw for the team that is around her. So I think, again, using language is really important, and having the skills to be able to show emotions. I recently, and I'm just going to use this as an example, but I recently, when I worked at the Bachelor Midwifery in Canberra, I asked the students to provide me with like a role play situation for a very similar thing like this. And a lot of the students, and it was a marked piece, and a lot of the students didn't want to and felt that they shouldn't be emotional, that if they cried, they would look weak. If they teared up or couldn't find the right words, that they should leave the room. I felt that when I spoke to them about it and how to behave, in a better word, was I wanted them to show me that. I wanted them to show emotions. I wanted them to be a part of this woman's situation. I wanted them to be part of her fear. I wanted them to show the grief. And showing grief, I think, shows heart, that you have a heart.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in our medical profession, we're not supposed to have one.
Mm.
And we are a human being, and we are people, and we are mothers, and we are sisters, and we're brothers, and we're aunts and uncles, and we're all those people. And I don't see why we can't show that. And
Mm.
in many, many years of, and again, I think it's, you're supposed to be tough, and you're supposed to get through this, and you'll just wipe your hands and you'll walk away, and you'll come back and you'll do another shift. No, no. And I think now the health professions have actually just started to recognize that. So we now in our environment have, and again, I think it's been a long time coming, but we get days off. So we get grief days. We get days where when we've worked with a woman who has lost a baby, or we've had a situation where a baby has died in utero, and we've done the birth, and we've managed to work through our shift. We are allowed to take a couple of days of grief, which I think is really important. And in the old days, I probably wouldn't have done that. And I probably would have
Mm.
soldiered on
Yeah.
and got through that. And I know in an experience that I had in my own practice, I did do that. I soldiered on. But I think back to that time, and I think, that was the worst thing I could have done. But you learn so much every time with a woman, with a family, with a couple. You learn new things, new ways, new words to say, new emotions to show.
Yeah.
And of course hospitals have, we have all the things. We have the cold cots, and we have, tiny, small prem baby clothes to provide these days. Whereas, a lot of those things, women who might have lost babies 30 years ago would have received none of that.
Yeah.
We've got photographers who can take photographs. We have amazing cameras that are now heartfelt, now provide the hospitals with cameras to take photographs. And those photographs aren't hidden away anymore.
Mm.
Those photographs are given to the women and allowed to, show those photographs. We ink pad babies' feet these days, and fingers, and all those sorts of things. So, I think showing emotion and being a part of that is really, really important. It's really tough. And I'm not saying that, it's easy to do. It's actually very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And hard to move on, and hard to come back, and hard to think that, is this in every birth, is this going to happen again?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It really highlights how midwifery is there holding space for women, being with women for the full spectrum.
Full spectrum.
And I think, as you were saying, that ability to show emotions that mirror and match what that woman is going through shows pure empathy, rather than, at least being this cold, looking down the hole sympathy. Well, at least you can go home now and, still enjoy a drink of wine tonight, or something, really cold and just callous like that. So it's that sitting in the pit, holding space. And I can appreciate how tough that would be, and why some practitioners may not feel that they can keep going back and keep doing that. So that is that delicate balance between, as you say, those emotional boundaries and managing your own energy. But it's good to hear that there are ways that the practice of the profession is looking to support midwives so that they can keep being with women and providing that critical support.
And we do have, now again, we have particular teams that look after these situations. So there are incredibly experienced midwives who have, and I think sometimes you just fall into this. It's not, again, it's not a course you can do, and it's not, you just happen to kind of be there, or you experience maybe loss of babies more frequently than other midwives do. So there is a team, and there's actually a really incredible team at the Mercy at the moment who actually support women, particularly with known babies that die in utero. So if we're very much aware, or we know that that baby may not survive a certain length of pregnancy, and our plan is to obviously birth that baby before. So, there's an incredible team that we have. I know other hospitals do that as well. So, and, we've got lots of equipment at our peril. We're able to kind of access all of those things. And of course, immediate counseling services for women too, where they're not being sent home not knowing what to do, where to go, who to call, how long is this going to go on for, how long is this grief going to go on for. This information is given to women prior to leaving, and it's not like they can just, they're expected to walk out of the hospital empty-handed. They're allowed to be with their babies for a period of time, and they're allowed to be part of the hospital environment for a number of days as well.
Yeah.
When
I've had conversations with women who have experienced loss, and I ask them, what's the kindest thing someone's done for you, or if I read stories, it will be that midwife that came with the little outfit, or that sat with them and cried with them, or that showed that pure empathy. So it really does make a difference.
Or that cup of tea that they were given, and made things normal, like a normal, like, again, like when someone births, and they've got their baby in their arms and it's screaming, and they're learning how to breastfeed their baby, we're still providing cups of tea and pieces of toast after birth, and sometimes that's the best meal you ever get in those days post-birth. But the same thing applies to women who aren't unfortunately taking a baby home with them. So we can still provide those things, and we can still be, and those phone calls, those follow-up phone calls, how are you doing? I know you're not doing well. What is it that you need? Or do you just need me to come and sit with you? Do you just need me to come and hold your hand? It's an incredible and incredibly tough time for all that are involved. And as I said, it's not like I walk away from that day thinking, oh, well, tomorrow's another day. You don't. You think about it for days, for weeks, for years onwards.
Yeah, definitely. No, I can definitely appreciate that. Well, thank you for going there with me today, Kelli. I know it's a really, really tough topic to explore and to talk so candidly and openly about. So I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your history, your experience with it, and your knowledge. I know there's going to be many women who will benefit from hearing the other side, how a professional and such a beautiful profession of midwifery does view it. Is there anything that you felt we didn't cover that you wanted to share for women in this space before we wrap up?
No, I guess it is also just that whole that we think about them. We, again, like me as a midwife for so long, every woman is so special and important. And I think people think that we forget about women, but we don't. You never do. And there's always a story that goes with them, with each woman. And it is, and particularly those that lose babies. Those are special. They are, every baby born is special, but those ones sometimes are just that little bit extra. And those are the ones that you think about just a little bit more every day, and wondering how they're coping, and wondering how, their lives are moving forward. Because, again, I think sometimes without being a private practicing midwife anymore, I do lose touch with women. But you know, it's not that I ever forget about them. It's just, we don't lose, you know, the memories, but often we just lose the touch. Like we
Yeah.
don't have that constant, um, come back to us, you know, see us again, or, you know, sometimes, I don't walk in, you know, run, sort of run into people in the street anymore. It's on the odd occasion I go, oh, I think I know that lady. I think I
Yeah.
might, but I'd hate to even go there. But we
Mm.
do remember people, and it's really important, again, as a midwife, to recognize that, you know, that you have been in a really integral part of somebody's day instead of somebody's life.
Yeah.
And so it is, you know, it's a really special thing for us. We never forget. And
Yeah.
of course, those ones are even more special.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much, Kelly. Really appreciate your time and
My absolute
information.
pleasure.
It's been so wonderful to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.